Statement info caused the security price change. So if they're looking, and as they can now, within a very small window of time, if the financial statements are released electronically on this day, and within 6 hours the share price changes, then you can conclude other. The further apart you get in time, the more other factors that come in, right? Which logically, you guys, this is logical, it makes sense. So a wide window of time, it's associated with security price change, but you can't say just one thing, that earnings announcement caused it, because too many other things could have happened. So you're looking 2 days away, be tons of other things. So projects, change in industry circumstances. Maybe your CEO left. All kinds of things. Maybe you announced a takeover the next day. So, what they established, and they are still establishing in so many different little tiny areas, was that our accounting information does have an influence on stock price. As a result, investors are going to use our information. So what kind of information do we want? This is where quality of earnings comes. So this is the kind of information we want. So high quality earnings is preferable. So we don't want flip-flopping between accounting policy. We want consistency in your conceptual framework way back at the beginning of 315. We want it to be unbiased and objective, includes continuing operations. Income should correlate with cash flows, right? Remember when you learned the cash flow statement and your net income looked fantastic, but then you look at it and all of a sudden you actually weren't collecting any cash because you just increased, and you weren't paying your bills, you just pushed them off. All of a sudden your net income might be $1 million, but your cash flow was $80,000 or negative $20,000. There's no correlation there. Okay? Now we don't ever expect it to be perfect, but you don't want those big differences. Transparent, understandable, clear, and concise. So rather than soft, so reliable rather than estimates. Good disclosure through notes, outline of environmental factors, and this is becoming more important. And it goes just beyond the environment your company's working in to be the economic, sustain, and things like that. It's got to be persistent earnings. And quality of accruals, do they actually represent future cash flows? So, for example, oh my God, I can't straighten this out. Thinking back to that example. During the pandemic, let's say we saw our sales and stuff going down. And not to consumers specifically, but let's say we're a manufacturer. So, we extended credit or expanded our credit policy far beyond what we normally would have done. So granted credit to more people or more companies. Would that have increased? And that gives us an accounting, which is an accrual. Do they actually represent future cash flow if we just widen our credit terms? Do they necessarily? We say everybody that comes in and applies, you can have $100,000 credit. What do come through? Probably not. I mean, by quality of accruals. Are they actually going to represent future cash flows? So if we put here, e.g. extending credit terms to customers. Okay, so they went on studying, and they still are today, studying what happens to stock prices when we release earnings or whatever. Changed to IFRS, people studied that. When we changed in 2011, found was, even though you might have the same news from different companies, the market's going to react differently for each company. Which kind of is logical, but then they wanted to see why, what specific things. So high beta stocks are less responsive. Beta is a measure of risk. So there's a really risky stock out there, okay? Its share price has been going all over the place. And so they release good news. Is everybody going to jump on it and buy it? No. For example, who's likely to buy riskier shares or me? You guys. Why? Because I'm old and you're young, right? So I'm going to be more stable. You guys have time to wait it out until you retire. So here, do I care that they release good information? No, I'm not going to buy it. Okay? So highly leveraged stocks, a company with a lot of debt. Again, they release good news. Well, unless that good news is we got rid of all. No, because it's riskier, right? So both of these, more risky, so less response to good news. Now, earnings persistence, what do you think that means? Well, if I'm a company that every year I have very good reporting, I do conservative reporting, and consistently, when I say I'm going to have a 5% increase next year as part of my MD&A, it happens. That's persistence. Or extraordinary, or what used to be extraordinary gains and losses tucked in there. And if I do, I clearly disclose them. That's earnings persistence. So if a company like that has good news, would more people jump on the bandwagon? Yeah. Same with earnings quality. And these two are very similar. If there's growth opportunities, you're going to respond when they have good news? Yeah. So, similarity of expectations increases response. Okay? Let's say all of you guys wrote your exam and that's how you thought your performance was. So because you all have the same expectation, when I say the class average was, 90, that's good news, right? To all of you. But imagine if it was scattered all over. You all had different expectations. Some of you had a bad exam and whatever. Then the response to the news, your guys' expectations aren't. Make sense? And price informative companies have lower earnings response codes. So if all the information is already built into the price of the share, whether I've let out the knowledge somehow through earnings announcements throughout, or I've given that means that price already reflects all that information. So I let out some news. Did everybody already know it? Yeah, it's already built into the price. So that's been the price informative. Okay? So I'll just put some of these notes down. So earnings, persistence, these make sense, right? You understand those two? Growth. Yes, I didn't need to explain that one. Now, similarity of expectations is a big one. So if investors all think the same way, there's going to be a bigger response. And just think of exam marks, like we said. And informative, it means the information is already out there, the price of the stock already, because the investors have already acted on that information. So, info about the company is already out there, and investors have acted on it. So it's reflected in the price already. So someone comes along and goes, hey, good news. And you're going, yeah, you told us that last month, so it's already there. Nothing's going to happen. Any questions on what any of those mean, you guys? Okay. Anyone still need this? Okay. So the implications of how much the stock price responds, and the measure is an earnings response coefficient. Less visible companies should increase disclosure to become price informative. Now, some argue only. Why would they say that? Well, one, as a smaller company, the more information you give, right, the more of your secrets you're letting out. Okay? So that's one reason they say that. The other thing is that if you're a smaller and all the large companies give all this information out, make sure it's act stuff. As a little small company sitting there in the same industry, their information casts a positive or negative, whichever it is, light on you as well. So if they all have a great year, you don't have to quite disclose as much because investors will see you as part of their and follow them. Okay? So that's called free riding, and we'll talk about it in the last half of the course when you decide how much information to put out. But generally, large firms, they're not as concerned about it as small firms. So large companies, investors will treat in the same industry like the large ones. So for the small company, that's called free riding. should increase non-earnings disclosure. So, as you know, the accounting profession keeps trying to get rid of this off-balance sheet disclosure, right? That's what happened with Enron. It had little kind of sub-companies that didn't have to be consolidated. So they dumped all their debt there. So it looked like they didn't have much debt. So that as a profession for years, always people find little loopholes and stuff. But ideally, if you want investors to get an objective picture of your, and they know you're highly leveraged, the more disclosure you can do or provide them, the better they'll feel. Because they're, okay? So basically, you got a lot of debt. Make sure you disclose a lot of information so investors feel they have all the information. So investors feel you're not hiding anything. Yeah, you want to know if a company's going to grow, you want to see different aspects. Well, our financial statements, the balance sheet, is the whole company, which could be huge. So give them segment information. Maybe the different areas of the country you're operating in, how they're performing. And if you break income, it will help. So outline non-recurring gains and losses clearly. Don't let the investors try and find it themselves. Or I guess you have to outline it more because there's no more extraordinary items. Now, on your own, you guys, this theory and practice, you can read. It shows how you can't just use earnings as a measure. Persistence and quality is important. So it will give you a better idea of what personal example to go through. Okay, so a little caveat about the best accounting policy. Obviously, useful information that causes the greatest response is not necessarily best for society. The main thing here is if you're noticing that your stock price, or you're watching another stock, company stock, and it's going up and down, or up, down, up, sort of variable, in response to information, that means they're not giving enough out. Because you as a company, your stock price to be going up and down all over the place? No, that's risky. An investor looks at that and goes, pretty risky. And if it's risky, they want higher returns, right? So, when we said as much information so your stock is price informative, that would reduce those ups and downs because it slowly comes in, and so then you have nice smooth changes. Does that make sense, you guys? So we don't want sharp ups and downs in response to information. So be as price informative as you can. have to realize is that accounting is a public good. In Canada, medicine is a public good, education is a public good in secondary school. It benefits all of society, so it's not just one focus, okay? So as accountants, we're aiming to provide the best information. Society has a nice, not a good words at all. Anyway, a stock market that works well and is efficient, the better for us, right? So, just remember, we're doing this for society. We need to maintain an efficient So unlike everything else where supply and demand can usually dictate price and things like that, it doesn't work with accounting, okay? So supply and demand doesn't work with accounting. Now, there may be a need, which of course we have, and cost-benefit analysis must be done. How much information is enough? For example, who has to give more disclosures? Companies under IFRS or companies under ASPE? You got a 50-50 chance of being right. I have said that behind your backs. IFRS, how come? Because they're public companies, right? So they're affecting a much larger proportion of people, and therefore the standards are higher. Now, when we switched to IFRS Canada, we could have decided that private companies also could have had to switch. The amount of energy and cost they would have had to put in to achieve that would have been too high for the benefit. Private companies are much more closely held, and they have much more information that they're just on a monthly basis, daily basis. Okay? So that would be an example here. So for example, private companies can use instead of IFRS. Now, they went the other way actually with not-for-profits. I don't know how many of you guys are taking for it right now, but if you did, you know it and you will. For a long time, not-for-profits, the accounting wasn't regulated because they were seen as a whole different niche. However, over time, they realized the benefits would outweigh the cost of making them follow the regulations because more people would understand the financial statements and it would be harder to rip on. Okay? So that would be an opposite way. So we'll just add that in. Not-for-profits became regulated after not being so. Okay, any questions with that? Okay, conclusions and, sorry if anyone is still writing. Research suggests financial statements are useful. They can be used, however, some things like reserve recognition, I cannot for the life of me. Does anyone remember what the A is? Accounting, it must be accounting, reserve recognition accounting. It's been a day. So, although we thought it was good in the beginning, it turns out it wasn't as useful, so we've taken it off the face and put it in disclosure. Responded well to other non-energy information such as inventory levels and so on. And investors will use all relevant information.